Welcome to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. Today, we are peeling back the layers of belief, fear, and power. We're exploring Farron Erkin's religious violence to understand a controversial thesis. That religion wasn't sent from the stars, but born from human fear and social crisis. That God is a concept we created to cope with nature. And that religious violence isn't a bug in the system, it's a defense mechanism used by static dogmas to fight a changing world. I have to be honest, I've been sitting with this material for a few days, and it's heavy. We aren't just talking about history dates, we're talking about fundamental reevaluation of what God even is.
It is, yeah.
Erkin isn't looking at this through faith. He's looking at it through a very strict materialist lens. He's essentially arguing that God is a product of human helplessness.
It is a heavy thesis, but it's also a diagnostic one. Erkin approaches religion the way a doctor approaches a fever. He's not asking if the fever is holy or evil.
He's asking what caused it.
Exactly, what's the root cause? And his conclusion is that religion is a subjective solution that humanity invented to solve objective problems.
Subjective solution to objective problems. I think that's the core of the whole argument right there. But before we unpack how that curdles into violence, I want to make sure you don't miss out on future discussions like this one. If you like my channel, please subscribe and press the like button. It really helps us keep these deep dives coming.
So to understand that subjective solution, we have to go back to what Erkin calls the childhood of humanity.
I found this part fascinating because it just strips away all the mysticism. You know, we tend to think of religion beginning with a great revelation, a burning bush or something.
The voice from the sky.
Yeah, but the text argues it starts much, much earlier, in the mud and the dark.
Exactly. I mean, picture a Paleolithic human. They're completely vulnerable. They have zero control over objective reality.
Okay.
A storm destroys their shelter, a predator attacks, disease kills their children. They don't understand why. There's no science, no meteorology, no medicine. There's just fear.
So because they can't control the physical world, they invent a metaphysical one? Is that the idea?
Precisely. It's a coping mechanism. Look, if the thunder is just random noise, that's terrifying because you can't do anything about it.
Right.
But if the thunder's a giant spirit yelling, well, maybe you can bargain with it. Maybe you can offer it something, some food, to make it stop. You invent God to give yourself the illusion of control.
And the text gets really specific about where the idea of the soul comes from. Erkin links it directly to dreams.
It's a brilliant piece of deduction, really.
Yeah.
Think about the logic of a dream for a primitive mind. You go to sleep in your cave.
Right.
In your dream, you're miles away, hunting. Or you're talking to your father who died years ago. Feels completely real. But when you wake up, your family says, you never moved. You were here all night.
So you have a contradiction. My experience says I went hunting. The evidence says I stayed put.
And the only logical way to reconcile that is duality. There must be a double. A part of me that can leave the body and travel. And that's the birth of the soul. And once you believe in a soul that exists apart from the body, you open the door to the afterlife and eventually to the gods who rule it.
From there it evolves, right? The book traces it from totemism worshiping a bear or a tree.
To polytheism, which is basically a celestial bureaucracy. You've got a god for rain, a god for war, a god for everything.
And finally to monotheism. But the core function is always the same. Manage the fear of death and the helplessness of life.
It's always the same function. But that management system has a cost. And this is where the text gets really critical of the concept of kurban, or sacrifice.
Yeah, he frames it as an act of terror against life, which is a pretty shocking phrase.
Well, think about the logic of it, or the lack of logic. If you believe in a single God who created the entire universe, who owns every single atom,
why would that God need you to kill a goat for him?
It's absurd. You're destroying a resource to feed a being that supposedly doesn't eat and owns everything anyway.
So what's the point?
It's not about feeding God. It's about human psychology. It's a bribe. It's that primal fear kicking in again. I have to give something valuable. I have to spill blood to keep disaster away. Erkin argues this is a trap. It makes violence sacred.
Which leads right into the atheistic evaluation in the text. The argument implies that religion is a symptom of our inability to solve our own problems.
That's the materialist view, yes.
Yeah.
If we solved the objective problems, if we eliminated hunger and cured disease, the argument goes that the need for the subjective solution for God would just wither away. We wouldn't need the crutch.
It's a bold claim, but let's pivot to how this personal coping mechanism becomes a political weapon. The text calls this the socioeconomic trap.
This is where the history gets really gritty. We tend to think of religion as, a tool of the establishment, the king and the priest, hand in hand.
Sure.
But Erkin points out that almost every major religion starts as a protest movement.
They start as revolutions.
Exactly. Look at early Christianity. It wasn't born in the halls of power. It was a movement of slaves, the poor, the wretched of the earth, protesting the Roman Empire. It was a class struggle in spiritual language.
And Moses against the Pharaoh. A labor
A
strike.
massive labor strike.
Yeah.
So if they start as revolutions of the poor, how do they end up becoming the opium of the masses used by the rich?
Co-option.
Co-option.
Yeah.
The ruling class is smart. When they realize they can't crush a movement, they hijack it. The text uses Constantine as the perfect example. The Roman Empire was collapsing.
It needed glue.
It needed a unifying glue. And Constantine saw this growing Christian movement and thought, I can use this. And in that moment, the meaning of the cross just flips.
It changes completely.
It was a tool of state execution,
Yeah.
symbol of terror. And he turns it into the symbol of the empire.
Yeah.
The religion of the oppressed becomes the religion of the oppressor.
The text applies the same materialist lens to the rise of Islam, right? It kind of strips away the theology and just looks at the economics of the Arabian Peninsula.
It does, and it's a very stark analysis. The text describes the pre-Islamic environment as a raiding economy. You have unproductive land, scarcity.
And tribes survived by raiding each other. Constant, chaotic violence.
Right, so in that context, Islam wasn't just a message about God, it was a strategy for survival. It was a social organizer. It unified the tribes, stopped the internal raiding, and created a system for distributing resources.
The spoils?
The spoils. It turned chaos into a unified state. But again, once that state is established, the religion becomes the tool to maintain the new hierarchy.
Which brings us to that opium effect. I know it's a loaded term, but how does the text apply it here?
It's about pacification. If you're a ruler and your population is poor and hungry, you are sitting on a powder keg. They should be revolting. But if you can convince them that their poverty is fate or God's will or just a test for a paradise in the afterlife.
Then they won't try to change the reality now. They'll accept it.
Exactly. They stop trying to fix the objective condition because they're focused on the subjective promise. It buys the ruling class time and safety.
Okay, so religion manages fear and it protects power. But the book is titled Religious Violence. Why does this system so often turn to terrorism? Why the blood?
Erkin explains this through a conflict between the static and the dynamic.
I really like this concept. It felt almost like geology.
It is like geology. Think of tectonic plates. Society is dynamic. It's a living thing. It changes. We discover new things. Technology advances. Our moral values evolve.
We move forward.
Move forward. But religious dogma, by definition, is static. It claims to be the eternal, unchanging, perfect truth.
So you have the unstoppable force of social change hitting the immovable object of dogma.
And that friction creates heat. And that heat is violence. When society tries to move forward with science or women's rights or whatever, the static dogma feels threatened. It panics. It uses violence to try and stop time.
To force the world back into the old static box.
That's it. And the text breaks this violence down into categories. One that really struck me was the scream of existence.
Yeah, that it frames terrorism not just as a tactic, but as a psychological need for people who feel invisible.
This is a crucial insight.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine you're living in a shantytown on the edge of a massive city. You have no job, no money, no respect. You are a zero. Erkin argues that, for these people, terror becomes a way to scream, I am here.
It's a horrific way to be seen, but it works.
I blow something up, therefore I am. It forces the world to acknowledge you. It's a scream of life, as he puts it, from those who've been pushed into nothingness.
And then there's deterrence terror. This is different. This is the calculated hit, like the assassinations of intellectuals the book mentions.
That is the static dogma trying to silence the dynamic mind. You don't kill an intellectual just to stop them. You kill them to scare the 10,000 other people who might be thinking the same dangerous thoughts.
It creates a climate of fear.
A climate where just questioning the dogma feels like a death sentence. And of course, we can't ignore state-sponsored terror. The text is pretty harsh on the Cold War games, specifically the Greenbelt Project.
Right, using religion as a weapon against communism.
It's the law of unintended consequences written in blood. The West was terrified of communism because it was atheistic. So the strategy was to support religious fundamentalist groups in the Middle East to act as a green belt, a buffer, against the Soviets.
They thought they could control it.
They did. But you can't turn that kind of fervor on and off like a tap. They armed and trained these groups, and once the Soviets were gone, that weapon turned around and aimed right back at its creators.
Which brings us to a specific target of this violence. We mentioned intellectuals, but the text frames this as a full-on war on thought. Specifically, a war against science.
It'd have to be a war. Science is the ultimate enemy of the static. I mean, if you can explain rain with meteorology, you don't need a rain god. If you can explain the universe with physics,
You push God out of the picture.
you shrink his territory. Look at Giordano Bruno. We think of him as a scientist, but the text emphasizes his philosophy, his pantheism.
That God wasn't a king on a throne, but was in everything.
Exactly. He believed God was in the stars, in the trees, in us. And to the church, that was incredibly dangerous.
Why? It
Right.
sounds nice.
It sounds nice to us, but to a hierarchy, it's fatal. If God is in me and God is in you, why do we need the Pope? Why do we need priests as mediators? It democratizes the divine.
It collapses the power structure.
So they burned him alive.
Ugh.
And his famous last words to his judges.
You are more afraid to pronounce my sentence than I am to receive it.
He knew. He knew their violence was confession of their own fear. They were terrified of his idea. And you see the same thing with the mystics like Khalid al-Mansur.
Who was flayed alive for saying, I am truth.
It's the same threat. If a human can claim divinity, the whole system collapses. The static dogma has to destroy the body to save the structure.
And speaking of destroying bodies, the witch hunts. The text calls it a war on women, plain and simple.
It was a systematic stripping of female power. These weren't women flying on broomsticks. They were often midwives, healers, women with traditional knowledge and authority. By branding them witches, the religious patriarchy could murder them and seize control. It was terror used to subjugate half the human race.
So we have this long, brutal history, but let's bring it to today. Why is this still happening? If we have science and democracy, why the surge in religious violence? Erkin proposes the vacuum theory.
Nature abhors a vacuum. Think about the 20th century. We were promised that secular ideologies would save us, socialism, capitalism, democracy.
All right.
But in large parts of the world, these systems failed. They didn't solve poverty or stop corruption. They left people hungry and hopeless.
So the secular state failed to deliver the goods.
It failed. And when the objective solution fails, people retreat to the subjective one. If the government can't give you justice, you turn back to the mosque, the church, the temple. The surge in religious violence is a direct result of the failure of modern systems.
And the text is very critical of the standard Western response to this, which is to promote moderate Islam.
The book argues that's a losing strategy. It's like a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. By promoting moderate Islam, you are still validating the religious framework as the only game in town.
You're playing on their field.
Exactly. And on that field, the moderates will always be outflanked by the radicals because the radicals can always claim to be the pure, more authentic version of the faith.
So if bombing it doesn't work and moderating it doesn't work, what is the actual solution? The book offers a triad, right?
It does. First, real secularism, not just on paper. A system where no faith holds the levers of state power. It's the only peace treaty that works.
Second is democracy.
True democracy, giving people a legal way to express their grievances. If you ban all opposition, if people can't scream at the ballot box, they will scream with a bomb.
And the third, which seems to be the linchpin for Erkin.
Economic justice. This is the materialist core of the argument. Terror breeds in the swamp of poverty and hopelessness. If people have jobs, dignity, a future they can believe in, the death cult narrative loses all its power. You have to drain the swamp.
It's an incredibly comprehensive argument. It connects the dots from a caveman's dream all the way to a modern teenager joining a radical group.
It strips away the holiness and forces us to look at the machinery. It suggests this isn't really about God, it's about us. Our fears, our failures, our need for control.
It is definitely not the comfortable version of history we usually get.
No, it is not.
We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from that sacrifice trap all the way to the vacuum theory.
And if I could leave the listener with one final thought, something to really chew on, it would be this. Erkin's whole thesis is that religion is a subjective solution to human helplessness. We invented it because we were weak. So, the ultimate question isn't theological, it's about human development. Can we, as a species, ever mature enough to solve our problems objectively? Can we build a world that is safe enough and just enough that we simply outgrow the need for the fear of the divine? Or is that fear just a permanent part of our DNA?
That is the question. Are we ready to grow up? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a pleasure.
And thank you to everyone listening to Thinking Deeper by 6-7. We'll see you next time.